Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to the event today with SG Innovate and Sing Health. My name is Tuan from SG Innovate. We are so excited that for the first time in 2 years, we managed to bring together such a large audience back to our space. But could I just check, how many of you have actually visited SG Innovate before? So the rest, I think about 70% are actually here for the first time. In fact, that's great because before the pandemic happened, we used to welcome about 15 to 20,000 new people who are startups, investors, corporate partners, government and international organizations to come here. And over the 5 years that SG Innovate has been here, and over 75,000 people joining us at events like this, what we have observed in the innovation ecosystem is a very quick changing mindset. So we see a lot of VCs actually willing to invest in risky ventures that are more science-based. For example, for every dollar that SG Innovate has deployed in a technology startup, we have about $12 of co-investments from our private VC partners. And that is a big change over the years that we have catalyzed. In addition, we also see a lot more corporate partners willing to actually work with startups. In the early days, it was extremely difficult to even talk to our corporate partners about adopting innovation into their business units. So that's another big change that we have seen. And of course, a very big third change is how a lot of scientists and researchers are now willing to bring their technical knowledge from the lab to the market, which is essentially the event topic for today that Sing Health and SG want to bring to you. Health and biomedical sciences have always been a big part of Singapore's Smart Nation mandate as well as at SG Innovate, and we want to do more. So we want to continue to push the boundaries on knowledge sharing to further grow this ecosystem. We want to make more investments and have more health unicorns out of Singapore. For example, I think like Biopharmist has just become a health unicorn this week following the Series D of $300 million US. And of course, we also want to build business savvy, capable talent for the startups that we are driving today. I would now like to pass the time to Associate Professor Daniel Ting, Director of Sing Health AI Program, to get us started for the day. A round of applause for Dan, please.
Hey guys, very good evening, everyone. I think everyone just can't wait to get up from your house and to come and to socialize. And I think this is one of the things that it's long overdue. I think, yeah, it's long overdue. And thanks to Tuan. I think as SG Innovate and Sing Health, we have signed a partnership last year. So, I mean, throughout the year, we are doing quarterly journal clubs. The first one we did was the AI Trust Journal Club, right? So we got people from MOH and we got people from academia, university to talk about, and startup as well, to talk about their challenges, the key factors. So the second theme now we are focusing more on the commercialization team. That's why the title today is how do we cross the valley of death? Like we got esteemed speakers here that we can actually pick their brains and hopefully we can make this as interactive as possible. Please, questions and not the typical Singaporean population where any questions, no one actually would ask questions. Hopefully, everyone can ask some questions and to facilitate some discussion. And the third and the fourth one, which is akan datang in the later part of the year, will be one on the education. How do we actually create a robust AI ecosystem for our next generation? And of course, the last one is more on the technical stuff. What are some of the emerging stuff that we should be looking out for? So without further ado, can I invite all the 4 esteemed speakers up onto the stage? We have one speaker who can't make it today. Unfortunately, he's got close contact, Christian from Novartis. But nonetheless, please welcome the 4 speakers onto the stage, and then we'll kickstart with the thing. No. I see on the side so that I can see everybody's, face very clearly. Okay, so I'm gonna. How many mics do we have? We have 2, right? Okay, so 2 sharing one. Okay, we're gonna go through the panelists, and I'm gonna get all the panelists to kind of quickly introduce themselves, starting from Hing, perhaps, and then all the way to Waichu. Yeah, please, Hing, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. My name is Hing. I'm a radiologist by training. I come from Tan Tock Seng Hospital, which is the sister cluster to Sing Health from NHG. And I'm currently the executive director of the Center for Healthcare Innovation. And thanks very much for having me here.
Thanks. Welcome, Hing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Henry, urologist by training, chair for surgery in Sing Health. I'm also the clinical director for the Innovation Center, which I'll cover a little bit later, I think. And I'm very happy to help how I can for the AI journey, of course, for innovation. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Dot. I'm the CEO and founder of God and building an AI system for doctors.
Welcome, Doc, and Waichu.
Hi, my name is Waichu, CEO of Heritas Capital. So we invest in early stage startups as well as growth ventures.
Yeah, thanks, Waichu. Is a speaker working? Oh yeah, okay, now it's working. Yeah. Okay, so we're probably going to kickstart off the panel discussion today with a few questions that I prepared myself. Please, but having said that, please raise your hand. I can emphasize a bit more. And then we also have an online audience. Hi, online audience. How many audience do we have so far? 12:50. Oh, okay, 55. Okay, fine. Okay, so sorry, I thought it's 12,255. Sorry, I mean, I thought like I was that popular, but anyway. Okay, yeah, okay. So can we let's start with the first question. Would like to ask the panel. It's supposed to be a fireside chat, I mean, right now, I mean, you know, Singapore. Let's talk about the Singapore ecosystem, and perhaps we get Cheng to share first, right, from academia standpoint. AI innovation and the commercialization part. How is NHG as a cluster having some of the initiatives, and what are some of the projects that's coming up that's surfacing in the ecosystem and commercial anything that you know, the audience or like, you know, should look out for from the academic standpoint? Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the question is would be rather also where we think AI is going to have an impact on our practice
and the types of the AI projects that you're seeing as well. Yeah,
yes,
coming up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can broadly categorize them based on the type of data that we are going to be feeding in to develop the algorithms. So I'm a radiologist, and so medical imaging has been very often said possibly to be replaced entirely by AI. Of course, that's a distance away, but medical imaging also include other specialties like pathology. Our ophthalmologist colleagues are also using fundal photography to develop algorithms, and it is thinking about the pathway in terms of the patient experience. So from diagnosis to clinical decision support in terms of treatment, and then obviously the follow-up care. For us, the besides medical images, I think data, the text data is another large domain. And there is structured and unstructured data for which we then develop either clinical decision support tools, or even just dealing with the unstructured data, developing natural language processing tools to help us to better extract the value from the data sets. Something that we have various projects on. And then the post, I guess the part where we are perhaps not so much looking at is the post-treatment follow-up care, which is becoming increasingly important as we talk about healthier SG, population health, moving beyond the hospital to community. I think where we perhaps have a little bit more head start is in the medical imaging side. And for us in radiology, I guess one of the exciting things that my own team has been involved in was how we pivoted from trying to develop an algorithm that more generally looked at chest radiographs or chest x-rays into more specifically detection of COVID pneumonia. But where I think one of my colleagues from hematology has been very successful in was developing the algorithm to quantify the pathology on a blood film, which is for pathology. And I think we're going to get quite significant advances in terms of quantification and helping the human eye be able to better and more standardized way, or more reproducible in terms of the way we diagnose based on the medical images. So maybe I'll stop here and allow the others to share, but I think there are plenty of exciting stuff coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think, in fact, that's very, very, very exciting. Like, I just wanted to expand a bit more on what you just mentioned, and then to Henry as well, right? We know Henry is a urologist, very famous urologist surgeon in Singapore, and of course, coming from the radiology side, Heng, and with the urology, all the cancer, the prostate, CAs, and things. Are you start seeing some of these, the radiology and the pathology stuff, the combination of the two start coming up, and how do you think it's going to impact how you guys practice clinically in the hospital settings?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So I definitely right. So I think there's increasingly amount of correlation between the imaging side of the matter and that of the pathology. The reason for this, of course, as we all know, in many sense, we hold the golden truth with the pathology in finding out. So a lot of time for what Heng has mentioned about the chest X-ray, eventually what is the diagnosis. So we really want to have that correlation. So in many sense, the golden truth of whatever AI, that becomes like the whole truth of what it might look like. And many a time that relationship has been really quite important. The question goes through a lot of time to whether the effort of annotating all the images and annotating that in the pathology, if you think about it, it creates a million of pixels of information. And that's the reason why you can see that how amount of effort is needed. In order to have good AI, you really want to know how well annotated all these images are. Do you have the best person to kind of annotate where the suspicious area of cancer might look like? And also the right pathologist to read the different parts in the pathology too. So it really, this creates that foundation of how strong the AI algorithm that might come up with. In urology, we look very deeply into diagnosing cancer within the MRI of the prostate and correlating it with the specimen that we take out from the surgery and correlating to that. Reason for that, I don't think we are here to replace the radiologists. I think the radiologists have a lot of work to do. But in fact, it's the other way around. We are trying to make sure that the radiologists spend the best time in their skill set in the most difficult cases, and therefore the productivity actually increases in that sense. They are engaged, they are at the same time able to have a high throughput, yet able to kind of contribute in the difficult area. I don't think you guys want to see the simple cases. You want to see all the difficult ones for sure. And that's also, same thing goes to the pathologists. They have a lot of mundane amount of work. And I think that's where I feel a lot of these jobs will never, ever go away. In fact, they will probably be a much more refined and doing the work that they really want to do. So I feel in those two areas, radiology and pathology for sure, I think the AI is going to play a big role. And I think it's going to be increased in the quality of life and the work that most of these people are going to do. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Henry. I mean, just for everyone's, why we're talking about commercialization, why I'm asking about the medical use cases, because for the commercial AI to generate return of investment, first we have to ask who's paying the bill. And if the clinicians today is not using the algorithms in the hospital system, there's no one's going to foot the bill. So I think setting the intended use environment is very important, because without even the first question, you can't even go to all the way to the commercialization. I just want to put this into context so that everyone can kind of follow the discussion tonight. And of course, I didn't ask him to sit in such an arrangement, but you see academia all the way to the richest one sitting next to me, right? The VCs, right? So I mean, it wasn't on purpose, but I think that was very well aligned, right?
Daniel is from the bright side to the dark side. Right?
Oh yeah, sure. From the bright side to the dark side, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Anyway, okay, yeah. Thanks, Henry. So of course now we let's take another spin, right? So Dot is here. Bot MD, we know, actually was a very key startup on the COVID, like really has spun off from the COVID-19 crisis. And, we talk about the medical imaging. Perhaps Dot can share with us some of the other side of the AI, non-medical imaging related, the chatbot related. How can the AI in chatbot help within the healthcare system? Yeah.
So one of the things that most people won't say, but I will say, is that most people hate chatbots. I mean, anybody who's ever used a bank bot, nobody wants to talk to a bot. Everybody wants to talk to a human. And the reason why that is because bots really are not yet that intelligent. All right. So when we build bots, actually one of the things that we think about is how do we really get a user to find the information that they need without going back and forth. And this is hard because if you think about it, everybody actually searches Google. All right. When you don't know something, where do you go? You go to Google. All right. Nobody goes and types, how can I do something? You just type a word. Okay, so when we actually started building BotMD, one of the biggest challenges that we had is that we were designing it for one of the most difficult users ever, the doctor. Right, and I say this all the time. I mean, like, the reality is if that you cannot get a doctor information within seconds, he or she will never use it. Okay, and you really only have one chance to make an impression. Okay, so the challenge of us for AI is actually about how do you train it to be intelligent enough without being stupid? And how do you do this in a way without enough data? All right, so this took us about 2.5 years. Now we're at the point where we can actually not even like, have you type, we predict. Okay, so of course the doctors love it because, before you start typing, it already knows. But it takes time and it takes a lot of data.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks, Dot. I was just about to. I always have this question: why did Dot not name it as a Dot MD rather than a Bot MD, right? Just wondering. I'm not sure, right?
Actually, always gets called Dot MD.
Dot MD, right? Dot MD, right? Dot MD. Okay, ask Dot, right? I mean, that's a chatbot. Yeah, no, I agree, right? I mean, so I think this is one of the things. In fact. Before I came today, I was in SenseTime, also looking through some of their technology. And in fact, I think the Chinese space is actually quite robust, in terms of doing a lot of these chatbots and future healthcare system, because the data in China, so long it doesn't leave China, is actually very, it flows very well, right? Because the big data, I don't think many countries can beat China, right? I mean, because these are one of the largest countries in the world. But it's true enough, because in Singapore, for instance, MOH, right, or like LTA or digital banking, they all have asked Jamie's apps, right? Everyone loves the chatbot because it's so seamless, and once you type, you can come up with some, some answers. You don't have to search through the busy web page and to find your information. So I just wanted to also ask, then take the spin to why choose, right? Because we say chatbot, how do we make money from chatbot, right? Of course, we can go back to Dot later, but so why choose from the VC standpoint for chatbot companies, or like for medical imaging company, or for AI in healthcare company? As a VC, you always need to do dollars, the dollars question, right? How do you usually assess, what is the worthwhile, healthcare AI products that you prepare to invest? What are some of the factors you look at? Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. You always ask questions that got me stumped. But in this case, there is I guess there are two questions, right? One is really according to what Dot has just talked about, right? And she's doing very well, right? I just sat with her and say, hey, how's fundraising? Is it done already? Those are the magic words of successful. Congrats again. Right, so it shows that her business model, her whole R&D that she has done over 2.5 years have really paid dividends. And actually for AI investments, I realized the early stage is, it's very hard work. And then when you somehow get it, right, when you can start even predicting what the doctors are going to type, then that's where the traction goes up. So a more generic answer to your later part of the question, when we talk about from an investor standpoint, really AI or no AI, there's a similar lenses, because ultimately it's not AI that makes us money. It's a successful picking of an investment and founding team, and then a successful exit that will make our investment successful. AI or no AI, or whether it's gene therapy, or whether it's cell therapy, or whether it's something else, are all themes, right? Themes or topics of how you create value. So about value, I think when we look at AI in this case, right, is the value that it brings, right? Is the value of a big difference or small difference, right? I think that's the key thing. So I listen with a lot of admiration of what is being done by our doctors. And I said it's bright side, because really they are so willing to put in their time and annotate and share and train the system, because there's also public funding. But there's this whole value of solving these issues. And then the next big question for us as an investor is the defensibility of this value. Right, compared to public research and you publish paper, you want the whole world to know and share your excitement of new discovery and knowledge. People at the dark side, which do investments, actually want to preserve the ability to charge a bit more, right, so that you can make returns. Right? So there's a bit of a fundamental difference between the bright side and the dark side. But still, just jokes aside, we're all pushing the frontier, right? There's role for public and there's role for private. And so from an investment standpoint, your aim is not to spread knowledge far and wide, right? To advance the state of the world, but somehow to create a business model to scale the deployment of such great solutions and yet be able to earn the return for yourselves, right? And from that standpoint, the defensibility of this value is very critical from an investor lenses, right? Yes, first is the value that can be created by your AI solution, and then the defensibility. So when we think very hard about defensibility, we need to ask ourselves, what if somebody else try to do what you do, right? If you can train a system to detect, certain tumors, right, from some images, why can't somebody else also do it, right? You throw the same resource, or in China, the Sense Time and the Yi2, do similar things. They got more resources, they can do so. So where is that defensibility? I think that is where, in our coffee chat, we keep challenging one another, and Daniel is always many steps ahead of me. And then when we look at topics like that, we just realize that we need to answer that question very well, right, before we are able to put money into the deal, right? And some of the answers to this defensibility could lie in, you have a unique data set that nobody else has. So you train a solution that nobody else can replicate. Or you are selling algorithms, which, there's the business model is defensible. Or, it could be that you create a feedback loop, and the more people use, the more better trained your system is, and nobody else can catch up with you, and things like that, right? So we are seeing a number of different models emerging in the past few years. I would reckon that if I were doing VC maybe 10, 20 years ago, there's less excitement. But today, looking at some of the successful startups deploying AI, such as Dots, Iris, and a number of other very well-known examples, I'm very encouraged, right? That more and more, I think a lot of startups are grasping these two key factors for me.
Yeah. I think, in fact, that's very refreshing and very enlightening. And in fact, talking about the unique business proposition about your startup, right? That's exactly like what is so unique about your product or so unique about your company. Perhaps we get Dot to share a little about how BotMD has actually be spun off, and then what are some of the issues that you guys encounter as a start, challenges, because I think startups at the initial phase is usually quite difficult. And a lot of people, I'm sure there's a lot of aspiring young generations here. How do I become a Dot, in 5 years time or 10 years time? Perhaps Dot, you can share some of the, the lessons. Yeah.
I'm not really sure you want to become like me. Startups are hard. Right? Anybody who wants to do a startup, generally I tell them don't do it. Okay, there's lots of better ways to make money. You don't really need to do a startup to do that. One of the hardest things in a startup is getting people to pay you. right? So you build a product, you're very excited, you're like, here's the product, and nobody wants to pay you.
We say who my tan, right? Who pay the
Correct,
bill?
yes.
Yeah.
Right. So this is one of the biggest value drivers of whether or not a startup will grow. A startup will really only grow if you're actually able to make money, and you can do this repeatably, not only in Singapore, but everywhere else. Right. So one of the things that I'm very happy about is that when we go into, markets like Philippines, Indonesia, right, we can actually get them to pay. Right. And these are not normally markets that people think of that, have, money to pay things. Right. So the fact that we can actually do that in a way, it shows that there's value. Right. The other thing that I think is very important in developing a business model is try. Okay. Most of the time, you don't actually know when you build something, what about the thing that you're building is actually really useful. Okay. But usually the users will tell you. Right. And, I have a mentor that used to say, one of the best ways to think about whether or not what you're building is actually useful is to take it away. So if you take it away and people go, wait, give it back, then you know that actually there's something there.
Taking oxygen from us, right?
Correct. Yes, exactly. Or maybe coffee, right? Or something.
Yeah. Or your handphone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So this is the big test.
Thanks. I think that's totally important, right? So to see whether you're dispensable enough, right? I mean, this is exactly like what Dot is saying. It shows like how important or how the users are dependent on your products. I think it's very important, and I just wanted to go back to the academic space, right? Which is where I'm from. Of course, I'm not the darkest because I'm on the right, but I'm more on the Cho Heng and the Henry side right now. In the academic space, right? We always have very good ideas. We have lots of IHL, right? Institute of Higher Learnings with very, very smart engineers and scientists and whatnot. And I just wanted to ask Henry as a start, right? In Singapore's perspective, some of the challenges do you see the grounds is facing, right? I mean, in terms of innovation, getting the product to hit the bedside from the bench. What are some of the things that we could help with the ecosystem, or how can we bring the external partners into the ecosystem to bridge this like valley of death that we are talking about today?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Daniel. I mean, the question could also be branched out into whether is it medtech or AI. I think those are completely different scenarios. I think a lot of time when we have a scenario where it's AI, I will probably start off with the AI since it's the AI theme tonight. But a lot of times AI has always been from the ground up where there may millions flower bloom. You just have AI and get things going. But a lot of time, unfortunately, as they go through the different rounds of funding and get the real prototype coming on board, a lot of time for major healthcare system, the biggest valley of death, I was just saying to Cho Heng, is probably at the end of the valley of what you think is a death, where the death begins. And that's when you start to do implementation into the healthcare system. I think that's really something that is really sad that someone has gone through so many rounds of funding and all this proof of value, that you reach that stage. And that's when a lot of time as a healthcare system, sometimes we do think a bit that maybe some things are meant to be a little bit more strategic and making sure that this is already a value by collation. I meant saying that because there's some things on a small group may not make sense, but when it goes by large numbers, cutting across various specialty or various services, that value is much more easy. At the same time, when it comes to the implementation, you're able to execute it in a much better way. I feel that while there is definitely a balance between a need for a strategic kind of push, but definitely the million flower bloom is also another strategy. In fact, I feel that the million flower blooms, that probably may not be a concern, because in fact, when it grows to a certain stage, maybe like Dot's program, you can actually be taken up by any other VC, for example. I think those are permutation of how this tool can help in the space of AI. Well, maybe I'll switch back to the medtech side of things, right? This is the physical world. And I think this one has a little bit of different implementation issues. In fact, at time, the passion are quite different. And the thought process is that technology by the inventor may feel that it will solve all problems. In fact, along the way, it's the fact issue has been about exposing the technology to a different environment. And this is where you want to use it in a particular hospital with a certain frame. When you bring it to teleport it to another hospital, it doesn't really work. And in fact, the inscalability will probably be the one that limits to where its implementation might look like. You can implement it in a particular environment, but you cannot duplicate it in a different one. I think that's the value of death for many a time for the medtech kind of environment. So I think for these two, they are quite different, but definitely a lot of time, I think a lot of issues has always been about thinking ahead what some of this roadblock might look like. So that's my view on how innovation to be implemented. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Henry. Cheng, what's your viewpoint on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very aligned to what Henry has said about adoption and implementation. And in fact, one of my agenda today was to talk to Henry about how across clusters, healthcare clusters, we can create platforms for learning and sharing about stimulating adoption of new innovations. And if I think about AI more specifically, I think there are many barriers to the adoption. One of that is really the fact that we need to validate the claims given by some of the startup companies that come and tell us that their solution has a 97, 98% accuracy. And the big challenge with trying to validate is that I need to create my own set of ground truth, which means that I need to plow through 1,000 images and get my radiologists to annotate them, because I don't trust what SGH annotates. I trust what Tan Dok Seng annotates. But in reality, I think that if we were able to pull together those resources as a country, and we could validate it one-off, I think that could stimulate and accelerate the rate at which we test and validate the algorithms. I think the other big challenge for us in trying to do adoption and implementation of AI algorithms is very often the people who think about developing the algorithms are not the end users. And so they don't quite understand the value of the algorithm in the workflow. And today in radiology, for example, we have anywhere from workflow optimization or prioritization, we call it, to actually providing preliminary reads, to actually providing a final read, and then ultimately perhaps in terms of quality assurance to do audits of the work that we are doing. So there are many different touch points for the algorithm to actually be adding value to our clinical workflow. But very often, at least from the scientist and maybe sometimes even the clinician perspective, what we really want is just a very accurate algorithm. What do we want it for? We haven't quite figured it out, but we'll figure out later. So we go develop the algorithm. So we had that challenge, right? We developed that for the COVID pneumonia. And then right at the end, when we wanted to get it scaled and deploy across in the CCF, the various other facilities, then the question that I was asked was, have you gotten regulatory approval? There are ways we can circumvent that for the short term, getting ethics approval and getting it implemented and so on. But in the longer term, if you wanted to commercialize something, you really need to think right at the start. Where is this algorithm or AI going to add value in the clinical workflow? And then that will help trigger some thoughts about how you're going to get it commercialized ultimately. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think that's totally true, right? I mean, this is something that we always have, discussion about. Shall we even think about P&L at the start of the project? I mean, how scalable is this? What is the economic of scales? Like we always talk about. If there's no economy of scales, then the question is, shall we even do it? Shall we even start it? Right? I mean, that's always a very difficult questions to answer, especially coming from the academic, the brighter side, right? Like borrowing what you, because on the academic side, we are always encouraged to pursue your interest and the curiosity about science to kind of do that. But we know AI and the tech, the digital stuff are very expensive, right? You can talk about IT integration, right? Then I shall not name the organization name, but when you go to them, they start having these dollar signs and things. It's very costly. So if you were not, if you want not to actually waste the resources and things to prioritize the resources within your clusters, then how should you do it, right? I mean, those are the questions that I think is quite important. That's why coming back to the ROIs and the pitch. So now we need the money. So now that we talk about dollar signs, I'm going to go to the darker side now, right? The darker side. So for Waichu, I mean, when someone come to your doorstep and ask for money, of course, you'll go through the presentation slides, right? The business decks. What are some of the important things that you would like to see in the business? I mean, I just trying to make it a 101 so that people here, and including myself, can also learn a little, right? What are some of the important things that you would like to see on probably the 20 slides that have been shown to you? Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, very good question. Really, from an investor standpoint, it depends, what stage you are used to, right? There are angel investors who say, "Oh, I just like Dot. I like her spirit. I like her passion. And here is the check. No need slides. Not even 20, right? No, yeah, just show face, have kopi, and that's it. Kopi means coffee. Okay. Yeah, you see, that's how it's like. So that's why people
tag along with dots, right?
that's what the triple S, right? The friends, family, and fools, right? But who turn out to be geniuses, in betting on business like that. So those are the early angel investors. Then later on, you'll find. I assume some of us may be at a very early discovery phase on fundraising. So if please bear with me if I get too basic. But then later, you from the early angels round, you might then go and look for seed stage investors. And so these people will require a lot more things, right? Maybe at least some thought process of, okay, what have you done so far? What's the initial spark of an idea? Prove a concept, and then maybe prove some value that you have first customer willing to take your, so there's a bit more proof point. Then when you go to series A, post-seed, right? Then there will be a lot more like, okay, you have a few customers adopting and other proof points keep stacking up, right? And then, of course, then there are the growth investor who needs you to show a growth plan, how you're going to expand from 1 country to 3 countries, 1 product to 3 products, and then they will start looking at your P&L, right? Because that's where you can already form a credible best effort kind of projections going forward. Right. So that's how the whole process goes. And different people, different investors at different stages would have that kind of different expectations. But generally, if you are going out to ask for money, I think it's important that you articulate the value, right? The value of your innovation, how you are going to achieve your product market fit. And if you can achieve that, then how the whole addressable market will become yours, right? And then you will beat up all the competition, and you will be Elon Musk, and so on and so
how
forth.
indispensable you are, right?
Yeah. That's right. And it's defensible, right? That means you are not just indispensable for a little while, but people could not easily replicate what you have done, right? So that's requires a lot of clarity of thought. Now then, let's get to the real world, right? Most plans that we have seen never pan out. Right. Sometimes the day after the investment, something has gone wrong already. Right. And that's where I think as investors, the good investors need to learn how to deal with a fluid situation, because the truth is that markets are dynamic. You are talking about scientific, deep science, deep tech innovation that carries technology and commercialization risks. So that's why these things are not for the faint-hearted. It's not for the amateur sometimes, right? But professional investors who repeatedly can be successful in backing deep tech ventures have their own formula for success, right? So it's not just a lot more thinking and a lot more domain expertise. So I like the point earlier made by Che Heng also, because at the end of the day, you need that domain expertise. You can't be just an AI, techie living in the ivory tower, and in the morning you develop AI for medical, in the afternoon you develop AI for education, right? And then AI for esports, another day. So I mean, that wouldn't work, especially for a very deeply complex, process-oriented, use case dependent, and very scenario-driven type of AI, as in the healthcare context, which is very complex. It's one of the most complex industries that we have chosen to invest in, right? And we do invest across healthcare precisely because that gives us a 360 view of how different actors and different stakeholders in the healthcare system interact with one another. And that has actually given us a lot of warnings or insights, whatever you call it, to either invest or not to invest in the business.
Thanks, Raichu. I think that's very important. And because we talk about the seed funding, the Series A all the way, and of course, Dot also mentioned that seed funding is really you don't even need like the business that someone believe in your product, they'll put money. So I mean, just a question to Dot, right? I mean, when you first started BotMD, of course, the first few questions that come to your brain will be, how much money do I need? How many manpower, right? Am I going to do it myself? And how do you gather the, like we do research, right? Minimum sample size, but for yourself will be the minimum resources that you need to kickstart a startup. Like perhaps you can share some of the consideration factors. Yeah.
So one of the things that you should do when you start a startup is to spend no money. Because if you can actually get by with spending no money, and you can actually prove that you have something, you can probably raise money. All right. So when we started BotMD actually started as a hobby. So one of the biggest things that I needed is somebody who could code. Because I don't have the ability to code, right? So one of the most important things to find actually is a very good CTO. Because if you can find a CTO and you can make the CTO your co-founder, then you really don't need to hire anybody. Because it can literally be two people sitting in a Starbucks, coding or discussing and then building. So when we started BotMD, we literally started with no funding. Okay, then we got our first check. Now, generally, okay, I mean, this is not the VC point of view, this is the entrepreneur's point of view. When you raise money, raise as much as you can. Okay, you want to raise as much as you can because you really have no idea what's going to go wrong. Right, so you want to make sure that you have as much money in the chest so that if you are, encountering a bad thing, COVID, something bad happens, you will still live. Right, because the reason why most people die in the valley of death actually is because they run out of money. Okay, so there's generally two principles to being an entrepreneur. Number one, raise as much money as you can. Number two, try to spend as little as you can. Okay, so this maximizes your runway. When we raised our seed round, as like you said, we basically didn't have a pitch deck. I got my first 150K. Actually, no, I got my first 500K literally in a room with no deck and just a whiteboard. So I wrote out, this is what I'm trying to build. I don't know if it's going to work. And the guy said, fine, here's 500K. Okay, so that's maybe a fool, right? Like, who writes you a 500K check after a whiteboard discussion? But generally, when you're at that early stage, most of the time, people don't know if what you're building is really going to work. So they're really only betting on you. Okay, because if you look at the way that BotMD has evolved, whatever we thought we were going to build isn't what we have. Okay, so this is one of the most important things about fundraising is that raise as much as you can, spend as little as you can, right? Because the goal of fundraising is really to get you to the end goal, right? Fundraising is not the goal. The goal is actually about building product that scales, right? So this is generally my advice.
I think that's very important, and it's totally different from how we see from the academic setting, right? So I know Henry is also the chairman for the the National Clinician Innovator Award, right? So I mean, as part of the government initiative, and especially touching upon just leveraging upon what Dot was saying, don't spend any money. So government money is available within the brighter side of things, right? So what are some of the support coming from the ministry side that is
prepared to be, they're set aside to invest into this AI innovator space, coming from the MMRC perspective? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Sherry and I do sit on the same panel, Charity. We are really trying to grow a slew of clinicians. Don't limit it to is it tech or AI. I think we're grow so I think a lot of time we are looking at how can the individual faster involving some of this individual to make sure that their submission is robust. And I think there's a lot of opportunity that people are being trained. When you say train, it's not just training to kind of find the ideas, but also to refine the ideas in such a way it's an ability to do what God has described. Right? So we do not want them to spend a bunch because it's government money. Because if that's the case, what will happen? It becomes a bad habit. As a result of that, and the idea to really crosses that value of that is going to be an issue because we're going to meet that value of that much earlier than we wanted to. So that's the reason why a lot of companies having them to try out inside the healthcare system while having the safety of the healthcare system. So there's some of those things that we do in that sense. At the same time, we also try to make sure they are paired with the correct mentor. Because mentors are really quite precious because they are the one who have had gone through some of this journey. And we will make sure that they do have the support of doing that. But last but not least, as many conditions basis of some of those healthcare systems, the position from the ecosystem to say yes to the time to do that. And those are one of the key that we allow to make sure that those is possible. Yeah, thanks. Battery.
Thanks, Henry.
Any additional points in addition, based on what Henry just said?
Yeah, I maybe just want to here, emphasize that Henry is a fantastic chair of the committee. Not so much because he's sitting next to me, but I think the focus is correct. The focus that Henry, the philosophy that Henry has set out is not about the project that are being submitted, but the individuals. And so he's on a path to developing the talents within the community. And I think that's the correct approach because the way I see it, and I've seen a number of innovators within NHG, and the point is, if you invest in the right people, these are the people that will continue to keep trying and innovate, and they will do different projects. Some will fail, actually most will fail, but some will actually succeed. And in fact, one of the hematologists that I talked about earlier, who is actually on the path to commercializing his solution, is doing so many things. His head of department came to me and said, hey, you know what? He's even doing things beyond hematology. And that worries me. I said, no, that's a happy problem because you have someone who is entrepreneurial and innovative, and you know they will eventually find the light at the end of the tunnel.
Thanks for sharing. I think that's really important, right? I mean, coming from the academic standpoint, I mean, to be encouraging and not suppressing but of course, we also need to make sure that they focus and, not losing the focus is also the other thing. I just want to go back to one of the point that Dot actually mentioned just now. It was a very interesting, raise as much money as you can. So I just want to play the devil of the cards, right? I mean, we know there's a few school of thoughts about spending, raising as much as you want or you can versus spending the amount that you need, right? So, and of course, from Dot's standpoint, you don't know how much you need. That's why you need to raise as much. So I just wanted to pose this question to Waichu. If you actually have invested the seed funding in a startup, Series A, of course, you will go for valuation and things. And then how would you advise the startup that you invested the seed, that you invested the seed funding to raise? How much money would you advise them to raise? Is it something like what Dot say, to raise as much as you can versus raise as much as you need? So I just wanted to, to ask, to ask
another, the questions. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great question. And I think Dot has given a very good perspective from a startup. But I would also say that some of these things are quite situational. There's no right or wrong answer. So if what you're developing is still very much first of its kind, there is a lot of potential trial and error, right? And a lot of times, it might take longer and so on and so forth. In fact, as an investor, I have ever said to startups that, hey, what you think you will do, I think you need to raise another couple of rounds before you reach there, right? Of course, I might be wrong, but I'm just out of goodwill wanted to share a perspective so that the founders can take that view and consider it, right? Because they might prove me wrong, but I think it's just in the spirit of sharing, right? So I might be right or wrong. On other occasions, we have actually told the startups that what you're asking for is not quite reasonable, right? And especially at this stage. So maybe you might want to take less money, prove the points before we give you more money, or we work with you to raise from other people. Now, why are there such seemingly contradictory positions that we take, right? It's situational. It really depends what kind of innovations we are talking about. What is our view, right? That we, as an investor and with the domain expertise sometimes to be able to say, hey, looking at this kind and compare with other innovations we have seen, what you have may be an overestimate or maybe too ambitious at the get-go. Then what is more critical is, of course, there's also the dilution aspect. Okay, so dilution, for those who may not be aware, means that the more you raise at an early stage where your valuation is still relatively more conservative because you have not had that many proof points, that means the less your stake, right? So in some cases, we also want to preserve the founder's interest for the longer term so that the incentive alignment is there, right? So there are these various considerations that are trade-offs, and we have to make a judgment call on those aspects. Yeah. So, but I think Dot has been very successful from her point of view, and I think that she has proven, her point of view is correct, and people who back her have made the right judgment. But on other occasions, many startups that made a wrong assessment, and then there were many consequences that got nothing to do with the product or the service, but it's other relationship issues that arise, the tension, the pressure, the expectations, and so on. And that is not a pretty state of affairs. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Wachu. And we have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to just switch gear to actually start asking some of the, the online audience question, and the physical audience, please. I haven't seen any hand raised. Yeah, okay. So we get the ladies first, and then yeah. So Laura, yeah. So questions open to the floor, okay, guys. So Laura, please.
Hi, so I have a question for the dark side. You as a stakeholder or investor, sorry, which is you were talking about a formula that for investors mainly was to have domain on the, domain expertise, but you were a little bit short. Can you give us a little bit more as your perspective? What is your list or formula to invest in a startup?
Yeah, so it really depends on what stage we are referring to, right? So, but generally, what investors investing in early stage deep tech startups, of course, is really to with a view to the growth, right? If this innovation is of value, is defensible, then eventually that growth will make sense. The way I sort of onboard my new investment staff is to get them to think about the outcome of their analysis whenever they work with any investment deal, right? Whether it's startup or otherwise, because eventually we working in the investment industry got to go to our own investment committee to ask for money, right? So what exactly is a thesis that we bring to our investment committee, right? So of course, that seems to be a perspective of the investment industry. But if you are a startup and you know how your counterparty does their job, it really gives you a bit more insights how to engage the investors, right? So I do try to onboard my new investment staff to make life easier for them to say that, well, if you put up your story, a cookie cutter template, that the total addressable market, or we call TAM, TAM, right, is very large, right? And this innovation is very differentiated and bring a lot of value to solving the pain point and address the TAM. And then the founder team is very experienced and dynamic, like Dot, right? And then there is a whole line of customers waiting to take the product, right? And then you say, well, there is a risk that you have identified, but they can be mitigated. Oh, and the valuation is very good compared to comparable deals. So it's almost like a checklist in your brain, right? That if you think through this kind of process thinking, you know that, okay, this is the way we present our investment thesis and obtain the funding required to support the companies we want to support. Yeah. So those are the things that we likewise look out for when we engage the potential startups that we want to back.
Dot, any additional advice?
So the entrepreneur's advice. The entrepreneur's advice is don't over-optimize for valuation. Everybody wants to have a high valuation, but the valuation actually doesn't matter. Right? Because are you worth 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 50 million? Nobody knows. Right. One of the things that I believe in is actually not really optimizing for valuation, but optimizing for who's going to be on your board. Right. So you can, many people can write you checks. Right. But the question is, who's actually going to be building the company with you? So when we raised, we actually didn't optimize for valuation. We optimized for people that I believed understood what we're trying to do and could create value. So this is the entrepreneur's point of view.
And I will just add to Dot's view, right, that it is very true, right? Because actually the investment is a journey. And, because success is not a proven path, there'll be a lot of pivots. So, you will know that you have a lot of new decisions to make. So it's better to find someone who are like-minded, that can likely be aligned with you for all these uncertainties you're going to face, rather than, whoever write you the biggest check at the highest valuation, because that alignment may be very momentary, right? And you do want your startup journey to be enjoyable, right? I do share Dot's view. At the end of the day, yeah, whether you are 10 billion rich, or you're 1 billion rich, or 100 billion rich, may not make a lot of difference. Of course, I'm not qualified to say too much on this.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel and Dot. Henry and Cheng, any additional points on this question? No? Okay. So gentleman there.
Thank you, panelists, for your time. My name is Manik. My question is for Prof. Chohen. I want to go back to that point you made when a medical AI company comes to you and says, use our product, it's fantastic, but you then have to put in the work to label those 1,000 images. So obviously there'll always be friction during that onboarding process. What makes you decide whether to actually go through that process with them or not go through that process with them?
Well, in general, I think we are kind of nascent in our journey in bringing AI into our clinical workflow. And we tend to adopt the attitude that we would want to test bed or validate any algorithm that we think is generally quite well assessed or validated or well constructed. We are quite careful about the claims that some of the companies make, saying that, oh, I've got 1 million data sets that I've developed this algorithm on. And actually, because we know how difficult it is to label films, and if somebody comes to me today and says, I've done this using 1 million films, I will really want to know how they got that 1 million films annotated and developed the algorithm. But to your question, I think generally we tend to adopt a very open approach. And I think the biggest constraint for us is really getting enough manpower, enough of the resources to allow us to very quickly run through and test and understand how those solutions can be implemented in our clinical workflow.
Thanks, Rick. Henry, any additional comments? No? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Related to the question, I guess a lot of the challenge impediment in terms of adopting AI in the healthcare is related to trust right, trust on using the system. Like any safety critical products out there, whether it's aviation, mission critical, there are national regulated bodies that certify, the product, the safety quality. Do you think that it makes sense for, in this case, right, going forward, right, to have a trusted certified body, be it at the national level, industry level, to certify the validity, the accuracy of the AI algorithms, rather than every institution, right, you set up your own effort to do it. And that, just like the example you quoted, right, at NSG, you will not trust the radiological images from SGH. But if there's a certified body accredited at the national level, would it make sense? And the thing is, how do we go about setting such a system, a framework inside the ecosystem, so that we can help innovators to really cross the chasm, to get the assurance that they need to get their innovation adopted?
Henry,
well, I trust Tan Tock Seng's sense.
see, you're the friendly people.
Yeah, I completely trust the entire Singapore's network for sure. But I think you brought up a very good point. Right now, I don't think there's one body that kind of harmonizes all this. I mean, this conversation we are having right now is really quite fresh and new. And looking at using this to actually implement it in the healthcare system is even newer, right? So I think this is what everybody's trying to work towards. And I think to have a single body to do that, it would mean that there will need to have some common, almost like a HSA bracket AI or something like that. So I think that's going to be something in the works, I'm sure. But what level, I probably have to look at some guidance from the national level to do this. Not something that individual institution can do this, but I strongly believe that the lessons that we all kind of group together, that will be the milieu that allows that framework to be created. So definitely, I think we're all on this journey together and happy to see what we can do together. Yeah. Maybe anybody else want to add that? Yeah.
Yeah, why true?
Just add quickly. I think that is an excellent thought, right? Because it is indeed maybe at the current critical stage of development and adoption, that this will bridge the chasm, as you mentioned. And since we are sitting here in SG Innovate, maybe SG Innovate could also look into this matter, because really this also marshalling resources across the different clusters, work with IHIS and other critical owners of certain resources in order to test out and make this work. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add that so Center for Healthcare Innovation, we are looking at how we can try to have a standardized way to evaluate new innovations. And I was just talking to Henry before this panel started, that if we can get all three clusters to come together and agree upon a certain framework, then we can quite rapidly transit an innovation that's been test bedded in one cluster and then move it across to the others. And then you can get a national adoption at a much faster rate. There are some ground challenges which Henry very cleverly reminded me of, and that's really the local integration, especially with digital systems, with AI. We all use fairly different legacy systems, and we do need to understand how these can be integrated across with new innovations. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ring. Actually, I don't want to put Lawrence on the spot, but on the corner of my eye, I saw Lawrence came in from MOH, and we talk about the national level, the AI, data analytics. I hope he hasn't left yet. Lawrence, yeah. So perhaps you can share with the audience, right? Some of the things that MOH is doing, and to set up this the governance framework and on the AI in healthcare. Yeah.
Well, this is a tough question. Okay.
You want to sit here, Lawrence?
Okay, it's good to be here. I was sitting here a couple of years back. I was from the pharma, from financial services. Now I'm back to public service. So at MOH, we are trying to craft this AI strategy for Singapore. It's nothing new because we started this journey a couple of years back, but we are trying to refresh this strategy. So under this strategy, we have a work stream known as the AI governance work stream. And I think what the question earlier on a central body that looks after validation, I think could sit quite nicely with this AI governance unit, right? Or focus area that we're trying to build. There are other aspects of work, like things like looking at infrastructure, looking at how we can organize national AI offices properly. There's also a strategy to build a roadmap, right, to prioritize some of the use cases that we see for national scaling. So it's early, but there are plans for it,
Just one more question. There's also AI Singapore is doing not just healthcare, and there's SNDGO and there's MOH, the initiative that you have just shared, right?
Yep.
So how are these the ministries coming together to coordinated approach so that everyone can follow the similar the approach or strategy when we're actually talking about AI in health?
Yeah, okay. So SNDGO is also quite focused on AI, right? So if you have gone to the websites, have seen what they do, they are looking at running national level AI projects, right? Like Selena Plus is one of them. They have projects in education and so on. So they're quite keen on things like building enablers, right? Technology enablers that can be scaled across different industries. Right. So one of the areas that we are keen, and I think they are keen, is to look at privacy preserving technologies. Right. So in privacy preserving technologies, we have heard of things like federated learning, confidential computing. So such technologies will enable better data collaborations across untrusted parties. Right. So you have commercial partners who has data, have data. You have institutions who have critical data. They allow both parties to share in an untrusted way. Right. So one of the biggest impediments to AI development is access to data. Right. If you have data, right, your iPhone has your health data, you may want to share with someone else. But somehow that piece of data can be very useful if you want to do things like population health, right? So they have a lot of data in the institutions, but not always very easy to combine with your own data. So things like privacy preserving tech is quite useful, in this scenario. We enable untrusted parties to come together and then share data. There are other enablers, I won't go into it. But so tech enablers is definitely one area. Another area is funding, right? So there are actually pockets of money, right, that innovators can apply to. I mean, not just at cluster level, but also at MOH level. Then we have the MOH Innovation Fund that cluster people, public healthcare institutions can apply. SNDGO have their own pockets of funding as well to drive AI innovation. Not all of it is public, so sometimes you may need to dig around, ask a couple of people before you know about it.
All the insiders tips. You guys know what to look for if you need funding later. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Nice sharing. Thank you.
Yeah. Lino, you have a question just now? You wanted to ask some question? Or you just wanted to rebut what you say, what SGH is not trusting?
I just wanted to say, we also trust unboxing scams. No, I got a question from the bite side, because I thought there's a challenge for us, right? If we're asking 1,000 flowers, or as Henry said, 1,000,000 flowers to bloom, at some point, some of them are going to bloom, and we're going to be realizing that the team that bloomed it is not ready to cross the valley. So at some point, does it mean that as an institution, as we're having the academic side, have all these bright ideas, at some point we may actually have to strategically change the team inside? And it may not be the founder, we can't have 1,000 thoughts, right? I mean, we're not that fortunate. But how do we do this at a systems level to allow academia to succeed, but at the same time still allow some to translate, or else they will just die even before they reach the valley?
Big question for you then, probably Cheng can help out a bit.
Actually, maybe I take a reference from my personal journey in medtech, driving from a research idea all the way down to a startup that's gone international now. I think along the journey, many different phases of the journey needs different people. And a very mature startup recognizes that. I'm sure Dot will kind of affirm that. And that's the reason why, as you had described, with the 1,000,000 flower bloom along the way, if a person has proven value along the way, you need to know that different people will have to come in and take the project to the next level. The worry sometimes is that some people will take over not to kill it, instead of to smash on the flower than to allow it to bloom further. I think that's what is important. Finding that outlet, whether is it integrated within the healthcare structure, or is it a VC who take it away to become an international thing? I think that's a different story. But
like you said, a lot of time it has to go back down to the original team. They have to be mentored and know that at different phases of a journey, different teams come in and do it differently. I think we have really heard it very clearly that, you know, there are scaling team, there's funding team, and therefore I think that different funds are meant for different phases. Most of the time, my lessons from my personal journey is that a lot of time is they can start off with a technology team, but that may not be the best CEO. That's very clear to me. And we've learned it in many sense that the CEO may not be the best technology owner, and you need different focus. And therefore, I think we just have to know that different phases, different people have to take charge, for example. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add a quick point to that is that my observation is very often the inventors get very emotionally attached to their idea. And actually, they may therefore not be the best people to grow it and get it spun off. And even my own personal journey, and I'm guilty of that too, we don't often see the value of what we are creating beyond what we originally intended it to be. And sometimes we really need people to ask us the very difficult questions before we can get to the stage where we realize nirvana, that, you know, there is actually life beyond the invention itself. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. And time is up. I was told. One more question. So I'm going to actually be fair to the online audience as well. So I'm going to pick like the trust issues that I think is quite important, because without gaining the trust in the intended use, we can't actually use it. We can't commercialize it. So I think I'm just going to read out these questions and I'm going to open to the panels. Are there issues arising from patients' lack of trust in AI-driven solutions? How can startups and clinicians ensure the end user trust these solutions? So perhaps I start with Henry and Cheng for the first questions, then Wai Chu and Doc for the latter part of the questions. So Cheng first, perhaps.
Yeah, I think maybe in today's context, the trust is between the doctor and the patient, or the clinician and the patient. The AI is just the enabler. So of course you can have consumer based AI algorithms that directly interact between the AI and the patient. But I guess in our context, in the medical field today, it's really having the algorithm gain the trust of the clinician, because ultimately the one that interfaces and develops the trust with the patient is the clinician or the doctor, him or herself. And it's really for the startup company or the algorithm to gain the trust of the clinician first. And in order to do that, very importantly, to understand its role in the entire clinical workflow. And again, we go back to the understanding of how the algorithm can play a part in the entire journey of a patient.
I think trust was the focus of Prime Minister's speech at the SGH 200, which is just a few days ago. And I think beyond that of trust, I think one of the key way to grow it for AI programs and others, it is really about creating the ability to kind of show what is behind the scene. Most of the time, people are worried that, you know, what is really inside there, and gets really worried. And if you look at this lesson learned from Airbnb, most people don't think that it's going to work out at the start, because how can someone go to another place and just stay there for 1 or 2 nights and walk off? What they do to increase the trust of those who use the system was transparency. So under the transparency of how did they do that is they showed many, many pictures, feedbacks, and things like that. That increases the level of trust, even though the person has never even gone there before. So that goes back to how can we learn from Airbnb in terms of trust in healthcare or in AI, for example. How can we show that where is the source of this data coming from, the relevance of this data coming from to create this AI? Maybe there's something back to what Paul has just described, the legacy or legitimacy of those data. And that might be the reason why we can actually help many of the healthcare consumer to believe that AI can be trusted at the same time. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, we use AI every day, right? When you wake up in the morning and you open up your phone, you go to Google. All right. So one of the things that I think is the same in healthcare is that you really have to think about the user experience, and patients are the same, right? So we are fortunate that we build products where we don't rely on direct to patient. We rely on an intermediary who is the most intelligent of all, which is the doctor. And this, I think, will continue until the point in which we really have an algorithm that can predict, right? Because no matter what, computers really only know what they're taught. Okay, so they can only get better because you teach them that what they're learning is right or wrong. Usually when people use our bot, I always say the bot doesn't know for 2 reasons. One, it really doesn't know. Right, so it's saying I don't know because it doesn't know. 2, it doesn't know because it didn't understand what you wanted, even though it knew. And the only way that the bot will actually learn is if a human said, you knew, right? So we need the doctors actually to help with that. And I agree that this is a big part of it.
Yeah, a lot of things have been well said. So, I do notice that a lot of the AI is actually, not directly exposed to the consumer, right? So it's the doctors who are intelligent and able to assess and to ask the right questions before believing and then treating the patients or dealing with patients. But I would like to draw some lessons, well, not just from Airbnb, but also the vaccines, right? I mean, you know that all these mRNA vaccines was developed so quickly, right, beyond everyone's expectations. And within 2 years, we are talking about oversupply of vaccines, and we have already had 3 jabs, right? That's unthinkable if you asked me 2 years ago, right? But there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. So even though today we talk about AI, but likewise, why should people trust that the vaccines are safe? It's still got to do with the data, right? And the fact that, okay, people will say, well, it has gone through FDA and FDA has, evaluated this number of studies and trials, right? But still, people will still ask, why should I trust? Because this is done such a short time, right? So those are very legit questions. And actually for AI, I think it's sometimes easier because people don't really understand that AI was involved. For most people, right, it's like you just use it, but you didn't even know, your pathology results or your radiology results was actually read by AI first, then went to your doctor as an assistive tool. Nobody really knows that. But vaccine, now people know about the different brands better than they know the LV brands, right? So yeah, so that's the kind of sea change that we see. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So with this, I think let's bring this to a close. So Irene, thank you everyone for joining us physically and virtually. So I may stay tuned for the next one. It's happening in 3 months' time. But yeah, so have a good evening and thank you the panelists for all the kind sharings. Thanks everyone.